Tonight on Primetime, tensions rise beyond the battlefield in Ukraine as Russia accuses NATO and Baltic neighbours of involvement in cross-border drone operations. Moscow says NATO and the EU are waging real war on Russia. Good evening. Drone incidents linked to the war in Ukraine are increasingly posing a security challenge for countries along NATO's eastern border, with Baltic states facing repeated airspace alerts and interceptions.
The war between Russia and Ukraine is increasingly spilling into NATO airspace, with military drones crossing into countries across the Baltic region. Latvia, Lithuania, Finland and Estonia have all reported drone-related incidents in recent months. In Estonia, a Romanian NATO fighter jet shot down a drone after it crossed into Estonian airspace from Russia on Tuesday. Baltic officials say Russian electronic interference is likely diverting some Ukrainian drones from their intended targets inside Russia. NATO says the alliance responded with a calm, decisive and proportionate reaction.
Ukrainian drones are there not because Ukraine wants to work with drones. They are there because of the full-scale Russian attack against Ukraine having to defend itself. NATO is always prepared for every eventuality. And what happened over the last couple of days again is what we trained and prepared for. And this is a calm, decisive and proportionate response to any threat.
Defence Minister of Poland also warned that the incidents could be exploited by Moscow to fuel propaganda and deepen what officials describe as a hybrid conflict around NATO borders.
A drone was shot down on Estonian territory. The drone was launched by Ukraine. Ukraine certainly needs to, and the military and NATO are also talking about this, to receive targets much more precisely so as not to threaten the security of NATO countries. This could be used for Russian provocations and could be used by the Russian Federation for propaganda, as well as to escalate the conflict and exacerbate the hybrid war.
In Lithuania, authorities issued an air danger warning near the capital Vilnius after reports of a drone entering the country's airspace on Wednesday. Flights and train services were temporarily suspended while schools moved children into shelters. Latvian officials say the incidents are being accompanied by Russian disinformation campaigns, falsely accusing Baltic countries of helping Ukraine launch attacks against Russia. At the United Nations, Russia accused Ukraine of preparing attacks from Baltic territory.
According to the information we received in Russia, Kyiv has no plans to limit itself to the use of the air corridors provided by the Baltic countries. Drones are also planned for launch from these countries' territories. Zelensky convinced Latvia to agree to the operation, stressing that identifying the exact launch site will be impossible. Drone forces have already been sent to Latvia.
Moscow provided no evidence for the claims. Latvia and Ukraine rejected the accusations, calling them false and politically motivated. Officials across the Baltic region say the incidents have become more frequent as Ukraine expands long-range strikes on Russian ports and energy facilities near the Baltic Sea.
Well, I'm joined now by retired Colonel of the Ukrainian Forces, Andriy Ordonovich, to discuss how the Russia-Ukraine war is spilling beyond their borders and raising tensions in NATO's Baltic states, and also what that means for the whole conflict. Well, Colonel, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate your time with us tonight. How dangerous is this growing pattern of accusation and counter-accusation around the Baltic states?
Thank you for having me. This kind of growing pattern of involvement drone operation can be strategically very important as well as politically dangerous for the several level. Among the key risks what we can evaluate, it is expansion of possible battlefield pressure on the air defense system, as well as civilian psychological vulnerability and critical infrastructure vulnerability as well. But in this regard, I completely agree with the Ministry of Defense of Poland, who mentioned that Ukraine has to be more precise and accurate in the target acquisition and avoiding creating kind of risk. But the primary strategic reason of this situation are Russian unfair and aggression against Ukraine. Second, they also use EW for jamming and spoofing of Ukrainian UAV, and there are such possibility. Risk is present, but it is not dangerous, and numbers of NATO countries already face not only Ukrainian UAVs penetrated into their airspace, but it was numbers of occasions when Russian by the false flag or intentionally trying to test the NATO air defense system, how radar works, what is a time for reaction, and other indication.
Yes, I mean, there is, as you say, there is quite a long list. We've now seen drones entering airspace in countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. I mean, at what point does this stop being kind of spillover from the Ukraine war and start becoming a wider European security issue?
It is already European security issues because it's touched number already EU and NATO countries, and it could have a political and psychological effect. And for example, country like Lithuania, especially the Vilnius, it is a strategic context of the matters very important because of proximity of Kaliningrad, as well as close to Belarusian border, heavy NATO logistic and networking right now there with reinforcing eastern flank of NATO, as well as a continuous presence of hybrid pressure, Russian hybrid pressure towards this country. Yes, it is a significant for both for Ukraine and both Baltic states, but at the same time, everyone aware of what actually the original cause of this situation are.
Yeah, Lithuania is an interesting case, as you mentioned, Colonel, because of course their leaders, or some of their leaders, were reportedly moved to shelters after the latest drone incident near Vilnius. Does that suggest, you think, governments in the region are beginning to treat these incursions as more than just isolated events?
You know, like in Ukraine, we are trained very much on daily basis in evening, take seriously the air alert. And here in the situation with the Lithuania government, they also have taken seriously of this siren alert about the possible airstrike. It is good because numbers of uncertainty are present. They need to figure out who launched drones or other kind of object, whether it was unintentional or it was intentional, whether it lost navigation under the pressure of EW or other means, and for what reason? Is it a reconnaissance, or is reason to hit a critical infrastructure and undermine a political and military authority country, and open probably other case of discussion among the NATO members. They have to be serious and show up a good example to population. because in current uncertainty, I don't believe it is spill over to those countries, but focusing on whole society defense, they have to be prepared because having such unpredictable neighbors.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that unpredictability is as you say, is a very, very difficult factor. I mean, this is the new style of war, I guess, that the world is getting used to. One of the difficulties here is attribution, isn't it? With drones potentially being diverted, jammed, misdirected. I mean, how easily could miscalculation trigger a much broader confrontation?
Miscalculation could be present at any time, and paramilitary and political personnel have to be trained and maybe to some extent even educated, because drones have changed the not nature of the war but character of the war, and specifically the cost of these drones not comparable with the more expensive military equipment and could be used any third country, for example, and explore provocation to gain some political, economical, or diplomatical results. Any kind of situation around the drone could bring to higher confrontation. It could make a strategic complication of the situation, as well as make constant hybrid pressure, because when we are talking about some civilian drones or the dual-use drones, which are penetrating into the civilian international airport airspace and creating mass, disrupting flights, and also are very much pressure on the local or central government how to manage it. And the crisis in this constant could raise at any time. But I believe that international community, specifically with the NATO umbrella or EU umbrella, including UN umbrella, should be very serious on it, because we are, or European nations are facing such kind of situation with drones, not because of Ukrainians won't create a headache, but because of Ukrainians are defending themselves. And in some unpredictability, with some level of predictability, we could face unpleasant situation with our partners and allies nation. And only due to the reason we have to give a more pressure on Russia from a political perspective, from economical perspective, and European Union does a lot. And I believe that our strategic partners, US, would do the same. And I know that three big powers in Europe, like UK, Germany, and France, are considering to keep more stronger economical pressure to beyond of our, we call it deep strike sanction, to drop, to raise the calculation of Russian military and political leadership to look at what they are looking for, because Ukraine would be Ukraine, and they will never Ukraine and put in the situation when Ukrainian people will be willing to lose their identity. We are fighting for the existential war, and based on Russian propaganda, I would say that lies, which Russia use, it is like industrial scales, and they could manipulate in different domains, and it is already obvious to the majority of world nations.
Well, let's just pick up on that, Colonel, because of course one thing is the war actually on the battlefield. The other is the war of messaging and PR that we're seeing. Russia claiming that the EU and others are getting operationally involved in the war. Europe saying, well, no, this is Moscow that's just sort of accelerating the rhetoric. And of course, it was Russia's decision to invade Ukraine that caused the war. Nothing more complex than that. So who is winning the battle of PR at this point?
Today in Ukraine, we had a very important international forum, so-called Forum on Strategic Communication. It was a lot of discussion regarding the disinformation and hybrid approach, cognitive approach of resolution. Russian using any level and any organization, international and national one, to manipulate with a lot of facts. It doesn't matter what area of our existence we are gonna touch. And all times they are trying to blame Ukraine. If Ukraine has started to hit a Moscow region, Ukraine is guilty because Russia is a peaceful nation. They are not create a condition which are pushing Ukrainian military political leadership to be more responsive on it. And we are saying that if they would like to have a peace, not provoke, not to make anything wrong, they have to stop at this war of aggression. And they're using this information as a primary tool of hybrid approach, hybrid war, what we are not facing for the last 4.5 years. It would have been started much earlier, I guess, since the first day of current President Putin into the office. Because when he came to the office, he said, we are not in position to invite Ukraine. We are a nation which, worked together during the World War II, but in some period of time after his 25 or 24 years of service, he said already that Ukrainians, it is the same like Russian. We did not have any legislation. We did not have any ratified with the parliament legal base of our nation, as well as we did not sign any Budapest memorandum. It's all, again, I would like to underline the Russians are lying on the industrial scale, and to some extent they are achieving positive results, specifically with the global South country, which are not for sure who actually cause of this situation, and all this kind of evil axis, what they are manipulating on time and using UN General Assembly, for example, or National Security Council to demonstrate their ability to promote propaganda, nothing else.
Colonel, very interesting indeed. Always good to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime.
Yeah, thank you for having me one more time.
Okay, after the break, we'll look at rising tensions between Cuba and the United States following the US indictment of former Cuban leader Raul Castro. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. The United States has charged former Cuban leader Raul Castro with conspiracy to kill US nationals, along with other offences, over the 1996 downing of 2 aircraft between Cuba and Florida. Well, the case unveiled on Wednesday accuses Castro and 5 others of shooting down planes belonging to the Cuban-American group Brothers to the Rescue. Our correspondent Ube Sharbanda has the details.
The Trump administration has officially indicted former Cuban leader Raul Castro for shooting down a plane that killed 4 Americans back in 1996. The planes were operated by a Cuban-American exile group that would often fly into Cuban airspace and around surrounding waters, looking for Cubans who were fleeing the country in droves at the time. The U.S. Justice Department charged the 94-year-old former president of Cuba with murder and a conspiracy to kill American citizens. The announcement was made in a federal district court in Miami to huge fanfare from the Cuban-American community. President Trump told reporters on Wednesday that, quote, "We are freeing up Cuba." Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is of Cuban heritage, released a video in Spanish on Wednesday in a message that was directed to the Cuban people. Rubio blamed the Cuban people's hardships on their communist leadership. It was the first time that Rubio has directly addressed the Cuban population at a time when the Trump administration continues to pile on pressure on Cuban authorities as the country suffers through severe shortages of electricity, fuel, and food. Rubio said that President Trump is ready to establish a new relationship between the United States and Cuba, but that it must be a relationship directly with the Cuban people and not with the Cuban military or its affiliated business conglomerates. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
The United States indictment of Raul Castro is prompting sharply divided reactions in Cuba and among Cuban exiles in the United States.
Cubans have reacted with sharply divided opinions after the United States moved to indict former Cuban President Raul Castro on murder charges, in what Washington says is part of a broader pressure campaign against Cuba's communist leadership. In Havana, local residents dismissed the indictment as politically motivated.
Now they're trying to bring them to justice for an act that was self-defense and took place in a specific context, basically in Cuban territorial waters. And it's a right to self-defense that any nation has. And I believe that fundamentally, what this is specifically seeking to do is to escalate the conflict a bit further at a difficult time for both nations.
Others echoed similar skepticism, saying the move was an attempt to revive old disputes.
Every day they come up with a new excuse, a new argument, a new supposed reason to condemn Cuba, to attack Cuba, and to stir up trouble over something that happened a very long time ago. And now, after so many years, to bring that up again is truly ridiculous. To me, it's ridiculous. It makes no sense.
But among some Cuban migrants in Miami, the decision has been welcomed as a long-awaited step toward change on the island.
This is the best opportunity. If we don't take advantage with our President Trump, Cuba will never be free again.
This is the best opportunity. If we don't take advantage with our President Trump, Cuba will never be free again.
Others, reflecting on their experiences in Cuba, describe the government as responsible for decades of decline.
I was born and I grew up in Cuba, and I saw a very prosperous country, a very happy people, and it has been destroyed by the Castros. The Castros have to go. This band of people have to go out of the country, because though Cuba would have the chance to live again and survive and grow again like it was.
The developments come amid rising tensions this year between the administration of President Donald Trump and Cuba's government, as diplomatic friction in the region continues to intensify.
Well, joining us now is analyst Carlo Santiella to discuss the latest escalation in tensions between the United States and Cuba following the former Cuban President Castro's US indictment. Carlos, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What's driving this then? Is this really about legal accountability, or is it moreover actually about a wider kind of maximum pressure strategy aimed at destabilizing Cuba's leadership?
Well, both can be true at the same time. And that is precisely the problem. The legal case may have merits, but when the law is applied selectively at the moment of maximum political pressure, it stops being law and it becomes leverage. And leverage on a government is also leverage on 11 million people already living without electricity and without medicine. That is the cost nobody is calculating.
It's very, very interesting point that you make. I mean, this comes, doesn't it, as Cuba is already facing severe economic strain due to US sanctions, energy shortages, blackouts, food insecurity. I mean, how much more vulnerable does this make Havana to external political and legal pressure right now?
Well, Cuba is already at the edge. 20 hours of blackouts per day, 70% of food imported, more external pressure on a population at that level does not produce regime collapse. That's my own opinion. It produces suffering, it produces migration, it produces a huge cost, a bill. And we already know what that bill will look like. Tens of billions, no budget, no plan. So I want to make a point that I think this is a great opportunity to finally to have a regime change, but also to understand that putting pressure on their own people won't change the regime himself, okay?
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, because we have seen similar patterns, haven't we, before, particularly in Venezuela, sanctions, legal actions, diplomatic isolation, all being used together. Is Cuba now being drawn into a kind of similar playbook, almost this sort of incremental regime change attempt, if you like?
Well, it's the same playbook, but completely different situation. As we said before, Cuba is not Venezuela. Venezuela has oil, gas, agriculture, stuff to sell. Cuba doesn't have that kind of engine. And the Venezuelan oil subsidy to Cuba, 100 barrels a day, essentially free oil, that deal is gone under any new arrangement. Cuba now has to pay market rates for energy. Cuba has no hard currency to do that. So same playbook, but double the problem. They are not the same escalation type than the US accomplished in Venezuela. This is a different country.
And Havana is calling this politically motivated. And from what you're saying, your sense is there is some truth, at least, to that.
Well, this never stays in a courtroom. Indicting a head of state during a pressure campaign, in my opinion, is a diplomatic event, not a legal one. But here is what nobody is saying out loud. Cuba and Venezuela are the same file. Cuban intelligence, Cuban military advisors, Cuban institutional infrastructure, all embedded inside the Maduro, now Delcy's, regime in Caracas. Washington knows this. If you want to move Venezuela faster, you move Cuba first. That is the real urgency here. Cuba is just not about Cuba. Cuba is the key to Venezuela, and Venezuela has oil, which means Washington may be willing to absorb the Cuba cost to unlock the Venezuelan price. And that is the strategic bet of enormous consequences.
Indeed. Carlos, what comes next for relations between Washington and Havana? Do you predict another move similar to this one, more indictments, or will the tools change as the strategy develops?
Yes, and every government in the region knows this. The threshold for using legal instruments as political weapon has dropped significantly. The question every capital is asking right now is not about Cuba. The question is, who is next? But I'll bring it back to where I started. Whichever path this takes, legal escalation, regime change, or negotiated deal, somebody has to write the check. Government talks politics. I'm talking about invoices. And right now, nobody's showing the invoice.
Nobody's showing the invoice. Very interesting indeed. Carlos, really great to get your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on Primetime.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Katie Wilson. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Katie Wilson is with us with the very latest business news. Katie, what have you got on your agenda tonight?
Yes, so the industrial action at Samsung was finally called off, so that's good news for South Korea's economy, and we'll also take a look at the war in the Middle East and how that's impacting several industries. So, first this evening, relief for South Korea's economy after Samsung Electronics reached a last-minute agreement with union workers to avoid a major strike. Shares in the chip giant jumped sharply on the news, although details of the deal are raising questions about future labour costs.
Samsung Electronics shares surged Thursday after it clinched a deal with its South Korean union to avert an 18-day strike by some 48,000 workers. Shares in the world's largest memory chip maker rocketed around 8% higher Thursday afternoon in Seoul. The agreement sparked relief, as Samsung accounts for about a quarter of the country's exports, and a strike could inflict significant damage on the economy and dent global chip supply. However, terms in the deal, including hefty bonuses for some workers, sparked concern the firm could face soaring labor costs. One union source says a memory chip worker with a base salary of about $53,000, for example, is expected to receive a bonus of around $416,000. A document showed these bonuses would be paid in company stock for at least 10 years and conditional upon the chip division achieving targets. Under the deal, Samsung is expected to set aside about 10.5% of operating profit to cover the special payouts. However, one analyst said that the plan to pay bonuses in stock could limit the immediate financial burden on the company.
The Eurozone economy is showing fresh signs of strain. New figures suggest business activity across the bloc contracted at its fastest pace in more than 2.5 years in May, as soaring living costs and stubborn inflation weighed heavily on demand. The data is adding pressure on the European Central Bank ahead of its next rate decision.
Economic activity in the Eurozone shrank at its sharpest rate in more than 2.5 years in May, as a war-driven surge in living costs hammered demand for services and pushed overall input price inflation to its highest in 3.5 years. S&P Global's flash Eurozone composite PMI fell to 47.5 in May from 48.8. That's its lowest since October 2023 and below forecasts. The reading marked the second consecutive month of contraction across the bloc's private sector. A PMI below 50 indicates slowing activity. Overall demand deteriorated sharply. New orders across the private sector fell at their fastest pace in 18 months, and services new business dropped sharply. Factory demand, which has posted a rise in April, swung back into decline. Services activity is the dominant driver of the Eurozone economy and a key gauge of consumer demand. It also contracted at the sharpest pace since 2021, with the flash services PMI falling to 46.4 in April. The European Central Bank left interest rates unchanged last month, but it extensively debated a hike to combat soaring inflation and signalled both on and off the record it may pull the trigger in June. Inflation in the common currency area held at 3% in April, above the ECB's 2% target.
Well, elsewhere in Europe, the electric vehicle market is getting an unexpected boost. Surging fuel prices linked to the conflict in the Middle East are pulling more drivers towards EVs, with new data showing sharp increases in both new and second-hand electric car sales.
Electric vehicle demand in Europe has surged due to high fuel prices linked to the Iran war. Data shared with Reuters showed a hike in sales of new and second-hand EVs, providing a much-needed boost to the industry. This shift was triggered by an upsurge in international oil prices to well above $100 a barrel. That's as US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran in February unleashed a wider conflict and led to unprecedented energy supply disruption. Across Europe, data showed registrations of new EVs rose 34% year-on-year in April. And the UK-based Octopus Electric Vehicles told Reuters they'd registered a 95% year-on-year increase in demand for new EVs and a 160% rise for used EVs in April. EV sales in Europe grew 30% in 2025. Despite this, EV adoption in the region has lagged industry expectations. Car makers from Volkswagen to Jeep maker Stellantis have invested heavily in expectations of much higher EV demand. Over the last year, they've booked multi-billion-dollar charges to cover asset write-downs after scaling back EV ambitions. During past spikes in fuel prices, consumers also switched to more fuel-efficient cars, but then switched back. But as several European car brands reported a hike in EV orders since the war began, Europe's senior auto correspondent Nick Carey said this time could be different.
In markets where EV penetration has already reached a high level and where charging infrastructure is already quite mature, this is seen as a seismic shift where people are unlikely to go back.
Well, it's not such good news for Europe's airline industry, which is facing mounting pressure due to the conflict. EasyJet says soaring fuel prices and weaker demand for summer travel have clouded its outlook for the rest of the year, even as passengers continue booking last-minute getaways closer to home.
EasyJet reported Thursday a first-half loss of over $741 million, in line with expectations. But the British carrier flagged an uncertain full-year outlook, as the Iran war continues to drive up fuel prices and weaken demand for summer bookings. The conflict has disrupted global aviation significantly. It's sent jet fuel prices up more than 80% since late February, as movement through the Strait of Hormuz remains constrained. It's forced airlines to raise fares, cut capacity, or absorb margin pressure. European airlines have downgraded profit expectations in recent weeks as the prospect of a prolonged conflict pushes fuel costs higher. EasyJet's CEO said it aims to bounce back from the Middle East-related setbacks through accelerated upgrading and continued expansion of EasyJet holidays. The carrier said its second-half bookings were 58% sold as customers booked vacations closer to home, and that overall summer bookings were behind last year. However, in-month bookings were seeing year-on-year strength as travellers continue to book their trips closer to the departure dates.
Well, the fallout from the Middle East conflict really is affecting industries across the spectrum. Over in Sri Lanka, soaring costs and disrupted trade routes are hitting the country's vital tea industry, leaving workers and families struggling to cope. Let's take a look at this report.
Tea factory worker Jacinta Mala is cooking lunch over firewood. It's a change the family has adopted amid rising energy costs and threats to their source of income, all due to the Middle East conflict.
It's difficult. There are expenses for my son and expenses for my daughter. Because of that, this isn't enough, sir. Despite that, we somehow manage to survive with the money we have.
Malar and her husband are among millions of workers dependent on Sri Lanka's $1.5 billion tea industry. Plantation workers usually make a daily wage equating to between $4.30 to $5.50, little above the national daily minimum wage. Now, fallout from tensions in the Middle East has squeezed the tea trade, as nearly half of the country's Ceylon tea exports, worth about $680 million annually, go to the region. The state's Export Development Board says tea export earnings fell over 17% year-on-year in March to just under $115 million. EDB data showed exports to Iraq, the largest buyer, dropped 38%, while shipments to the United Arab Emirates plunged 93%. According to the chairman of Ceylon Tea Traders Association, demand from Iran, usually another big buyer, has fully stopped. Dushanta De Silva says a big issue is getting the product shipped out.
Our challenge is more of getting the exports out because of the freight rate increases, which has been phenomenal. So those are the challenges, and some shipping lines not able to take cargo. So that has resulted in about 10 to 15% drop in exports during March.
Dilma, a well-known Ceylon tea brand that sells to 108 countries, said it is looking for ways to manage the challenges brought about by what it called the new normal. But for workers like Malar, who is already struggling to make ends meet, the future is worrying.
We don't know whether we can cope. If this war continues, many people will face hardship.
And finally, some sweeter news for chocolate lovers. After a year of smaller bars and cocoa substitutes, major confectioners are beginning to return to more traditional recipes as cocoa prices tumble from last year's record highs. The shift could mean richer chocolate, lower prices for consumers, and a boost in demand for cocoa farmers.
After a year of smaller bars or extra wafers, one major chocolate maker is putting the cocoa back in. The US confectioner Hershey announced plans to revert next year to original recipes and move away from chocolate alternatives. A near 70% slump in bean prices since 2024 makes the traditional treat more profitable. This shift promises lower shelf prices for consumers and a demand recovery for cocoa farmers. It also signals a partial reversal away from alternatives made with too little cocoa to qualify as chocolate. Industry experts say other major brands are likely to follow suit, but neither Mondelez, Ferrero nor Nestlé made immediate comment. Cocoa prices nearly tripled to record highs in late 2024, thanks to adverse weather and disease. Chocolate makers began shrinking bar sizes, adding more wafers, fruit and nuts, and introducing chocolate alternatives. But a pivot back to more traditional chocolate would be good news for the nearly 2 million poverty-stricken cocoa farmers in top growers Ivory Coast and Ghana. A leading cocoa expert said the fall in cocoa prices should mean demand recovery will start in the second half of the year. However, it will likely take a couple of years to see volumes return to levels seen before the 2024 price rally.
Good news for everyone then, although I'm not a massive fan of Hershey. I find it a bit sticky. What about you, Guy?
Not a fan either, Katie. I like the chocolate here in Azerbaijan, but I'm also, as a Brit, a big fan of British chocolate. So I think a twirl would be my favourite bar.
Cadbury's Whisper for me.
Ooh, nice choice, nice choice. Katie, thank you very much indeed, as always. Great stuff. Okay, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the World Urban Forum here in Baku, where discussions have shifted towards urban resilience, water access, and new approaches to sustainable city planning. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Against the backdrop of the growing global water crisis and rapid urbanisation, access to safe water and sanitation in cities became one of the key topics at the World Urban Forum 13. Well, experts and representatives of international organisations stressed the importance of integrating WASH services, housing policies and land rights to build more inclusive and resilient cities. Our correspondent Narticek Yahangurli reports.
As cities grow faster and climate pressures intensify, the global water crisis is becoming impossible to ignore. At WEF 13, UN agencies and urban experts gather to confront a stark reality. Millions of people in urban areas still live without safe water and sanitation. The session focused on how housing, land rights and wash services must work together to build inclusive and resilient cities ahead of the 2026 UN Water Conference in Abu Dhabi. Speakers highlighted that poor urban communities are the most affected. Many families living in informal settlements face unsafe water, poor sanitation, insecure housing and increasing climate risks. Participants stressed that access to water and sanitation is a basic human right and a key part of living conditions. The discussion called for practical solutions that improve services without forcing people from their homes. Delegates emphasized the need to include WASH in slum upgrading, urban planning and land governance policies. One of the key outcomes of the session was the presentation of a roadmap linking WEF 13 to the 2026 UN Water Conference. The roadmap aims to help cities develop climate-resilient WASH systems and secure sustainable financing for urban services.
Water scarcity, even though we've got a lot of rain, but it's not relevant because it creates flooding and the rain just moves away. So I think it is important to build more reservoirs that can contain enough water for our communities.
The World Urban Forum in Baku can help us reflect on the need for city residents to have access to water in their homes. Water is a human right. Water is a shared resource belonging to all humanity and to all residents. Local governments must respond to this need through effective policies that address access to water, particularly for vulnerable groups, informal settlements and areas without legal property rights. Even so, cities and governments have an obligation to guarantee this right. We are bringing the voice of local governments to Abu Dhabi and to this year's conference in order to support and strengthen the role of governments in fulfilling this fundamental human right that people rightfully demand. As governments, we carry the responsibility of providing these services to the population every day, and we face these challenges more directly than any other level of administration. That is why the voice of local governments is especially important at the Water Conference and in Abu Dhabi. The aim is for all levels of government, together with urban communities and residents, to work collectively to solve this major problem, which could otherwise become a source of future global conflict.
Development banks, utilities and local experts shared successful examples from cities and called for stronger partnerships and greater political support. The session ended with a clear message. Achieving SDG 6 and building resilient cities will require coordinated action, inclusive planning and investment in the communities most in need. I'm Narchechek Jahangirli here with Natik Mehmedov, A News.
Well, the forum's discussions are also shifting from global sustainability ambitions to practical local implementation. One of the sessions focused on Azerbaijan's first national sustainability framework, the Sustainability Practices Standard developed by the Ecosphere Social Ecological Centre. A News' Aytan Shukurova has more.
One of the sessions held within the framework of 13th World Urban Forum focused on the Sustainable Practices Standard, Azerbaijan's first national sustainability standard, as the event enters its final days in Baku. According to the information presented during the session, the Sustainable Practices Standard is being developed by the Ecosphere Social Ecological Centre and is considered the country's first national sustainability standard. Its main objective is to bridge the gap between global sustainability goals and local implementation mechanisms. According to the presentation, the standard will assess how sustainability principles are integrated into day-to-day operations. This includes indicators such as energy use, efficient resource management, waste reduction, operational optimization, and the use of local resources.
For us, this is more than a technical framework. It is an attempt to create a new culture of environmental and social responsibility, adapt to our own regional reality. Because sustainability cannot exist only in global reports, international declarations, or conference discussions. It must become visible in everyday discussions in hotels, museums, schools, tourism destinations, public institutions, and urban spaces. Every country has its own environmental challenges, social dynamics, traditions, and development pathways. And this is why local sustainability systems matter. They help translate global principles into practical action that people can truly implement.
Addressing the session via video message, representative of President of Azerbaijan on climate issues, Mukhtar Babayev, linked the initiative to Azerbaijan's broader sustainability and climate agenda. Babayev noted that the successful hosting of COP29 in Baku further reinforced Azerbaijan's commitment to practical climate action and international cooperation. According to him, discussions during COP29 increasingly focused not only on climate targets, but also on implementation, resilience, climate finance, and the integration of sustainability into development policy. He also praised the work of the Ecosphere Social Ecological Centre and its patterns involved in developing the SPS framework, emphasizing the importance of combining international experience with national realities in order to create standards that are both ambitious and practical. The broader context of the discussion was also reflected in global urbanization trends. According to United Nations data cited during the session, around 56% of the world's population currently lives in urban areas, with that figure expected to rise to 68% by 2050. Cities already account for more than 75% of global energy consumption and over 70% of carbon emissions. Aytan Shukurova, Erkin Mehdiyev.
Joining us now is Murad Muradov to discuss the key themes emerging from the World Urban Forum, including the global housing crisis and the shift towards practical implementation in urban development. Murad, great to have you with us on the show tonight. Thanks for joining us. As we heard there, discussions at the 13th World Urban Forum shifting from global sustainability ambitions more to practical actions, implementation locally. What does that shift actually change for how cities are approaching policy on the ground?
In general, the specificity of urban development, the concept of the science, indeed favorizes this localized approach. Well, unlike, let's say, COP with its green agenda, which tends to be quite top-down and with states and big institutions and corporations discussing the ways, to change technology and to be more efficient. So, well, each big city is unique, and of course, I mean, all aspects, starting from climate to population to cultural, historic peculiarities, landscapes, and patterns of behavior of its inhabitants, it all shapes the city life. And of course, let's say Bangkok cannot, let's say, copy-paste the ways London resolves this problem, or, for example, Istanbul is totally different from, let's say, New York. So yes, of course, this is a natural trend. I think this Urban Forum is a very good platform where theory can very easily translate into practice. And especially now, with, let's say, the including emphasis also on multipolarity in global politics, so more new powers emerging, and the concept of middle powers becoming more and more relevant. I think also, the same happened with cities, and now big cities, let's say, in non-Western countries don't want to blindly follow the, say, established practices. They all try to have the new, unique approach. And also the way technology knowledge proliferate, it also, favors a new generation of urban scientists and activists and planners who really want to make their cities apt for the people who live there.
Yes, yeah, indeed. No one size fits all. One of today's sessions, Murad, focused on Azerbaijan's Sustainable Practices Standard, developed by the Ecosphere Social Ecological Centre. How significant is it that the host country is presenting its own national framework?
I think it's very important because, let's say, these big events are an opportunity for a host country to showcase itself. And I've been witnessing a few sessions organized by Azerbaijani pavilion and also, let's say, some other stands which showed the backlog of transport. And I must say that also several government ministers of Azerbaijan also made very detailed speeches about the way the country is transforming itself. And those Minister of Economy Japarov, Minister of Communications Nabiyev, they were frank enough, and they didn't, let's say, sound blunt, and they also emphasized all the difficulties and which also follow this process. So yes, I think the way Azerbaijan put it is also I think a very important step in terms of making the country more reliable. So, and I think that the more, let's say, world will know about not only the handful of net buildings and, let's say, coastline, but also see it as a dynamic, developing and growing city with all its, issues, challenges, and also very creative ways to go forward. I think the more, it will serve in the long term, to increase the interest in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, indeed. Speakers from many countries, including, of course, Azerbaijan, have stressed that recovery is not just about rebuilding walls, but it's about rebuilding lives. In practical terms, how does that reshape what housing recovery actually means after crises have taken place?
Well, like one of the sessions, organized yesterday focused on the restoration and, say, revival of the cities and whole territories of Karabakh liberated in 2020 afterwards. And the message of that event was that the task which Azerbaijan faced was not only, let's say, to build, let's say, a certain number of houses, or let's say, to pull up sewage lines or whatever. I mean, it was basically to refigure and reimagine the whole space which was abandoned for 30 years, and to make it in such a way that people who are sometimes kids or grandkids of those who had to flee from these territories, so that they would be passionate enough to come back and to reclaim this land. And I think that was important because really it showed how, let's say, complex science is. I mean, at the same time, it's bringing together culture, history, geography, environmental science, architecture, of course, and also, I mean, it should all be put in the economic context. So, and also, well, I really like the takes made by various participants, let's say, from African countries or South Asia, and the cities have been endemically targeted by overpopulation and climate change, and it really show that I mean, the scarce resources, and in the context of constantly growing population and size, so how they manage, to try to use these scarce resources, to make have a momentum where locals can have a more say in the way the city grows.
Yes, indeed. Lots of conversations taking place at the event itself. One of the consistent themes of conversation that I've noticed seems to be highlighting that displaced communities should help shape recovery from day one and not just receive decisions from above, so to speak. So how far is the international system, do you think, actually delivering on that principle in reality?
Well, in my opinion, it's all up to the state, because, as I said, urban science and urban development is something which really, I mean, it's very intimately connected to the local context. And of course, well, Azerbaijan, I mean, when it comes to Karabakh, it faced quite a number, let's say, of unjust, unbiased approaches, and really, which made, let's say, the return of its occupied lands much than it could have been. But still, now that our territorial integrity has been fully restored, and Baku now, I mean, for years has been able, to really reclaim this lands fully. Now it's up to us, and I think, well, of course, Azerbaijan attracts a number of international, say, developers, to Karabakh, including Turkish ones, Italian, say, some from Eastern European countries. But still, I mean, with all their experience and all their know-how, well, it's really up to the state and, of course, the community, to decide how cities of the future, or let's say villages of the future, as also in Karabakh we see the concept of smart villages, emerging. How they will look like, and also how they should look like, in order to make the people really proud of it and being able to benefit from the life environment that is.
Yeah, some of the figures that we've seen mentioned at the event really shine a light on the global scale of some of the challenges that we're presented with. 3 billion people now lacking adequate housing, 300 million people actually without a home at all. With so many countries coming together in Baku and such open conversation taking place, are you hopeful that this could mark some kind of turning point in how the governments of the world start to really tackle this global problem?
Well, we should always retain hope, of course. And sadly, I would say the global environment of the recent years has been characterized by increasing fragmentation and unpredictability. And which means that, international law, I mean, norms, let's say, haven't been really efficient, let's say, and it triggers, of course, states to rely most on themselves. I think now it's high time, also to reconsider the way, let's say, international, multilateral cooperation is being made. And especially in this situation where more and more states, including in our geography, have to allocate the increasing share of their budgets, of the resources to security, to be able to protect itself. We see even rich countries like European countries now, face the challenge of being basically pushed to invest huge sums of money in arms production, in defense industry, meaning that they have to postpone, the solutions to the acute housing crisis, which also now faces some European countries. And I think that now it's really as much as ever. So we need really more holistic and more up-to-date approach to, let's say, international norms, which first will mean that the states can start to really trust more to each other, and which will make regional, let's say, cooperation more possible, and of course also help to bring up resources and to spend it more efficiently on resolving the most acute humanitarian problems. And in my opinion, what we have now with Central Asia and Azerbaijan increasingly becoming, integrated Central Asian countries with the new C6 format, and also I must say that all the Central Asian countries' pavilions were brilliantly. And this cooperation may become a kind of a harbinger of future global order when the regions sit up on the table, pull up some resources, and can discuss the new ways, the new rules, and also ways to kind of optimize and maximize the development opportunities.
Murad, always great to get your analysis. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the latest developments in the Iran-US diplomacy and mediation efforts. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. US President Donald Trump says the United States could decide within days whether to take further action against Iran, as negotiations over Tehran's nuclear program appear to be reaching a critical stage.
President Donald Trump says Washington is prepared to move quickly if Iran fails to deliver what he called the right answers in ongoing negotiations over its nuclear program. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, Trump said the United States could wait a few days for a response if it could prevent more people being killed, but warned action could also come very quickly. He also rejected reports that Washington had offered Iran oil sanctions relief, saying no relief would come before an agreement is signed.
Very right on the borderline, believe me. If we don't get the right answers, it goes very quickly. We're all ready to go. We have to get the right answers. It would have to be a complete 100% good answers. And if we do, we save a lot of time, energy, and lives, most importantly.
During a commencement address at the US Coast Guard Academy, Trump repeated that Iran would not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Trump claimed Iran's Navy and Air Force were largely gone and questioned whether Tehran would sign a deal or face further military action.
You saw that right now in Iran. Everything's gone. Their Navy's gone. Their Air Force is gone. Just about everything. The only question is, do we go and finish it up, or are they going to be signing a document? Let's see what happens. But we're a hot country. We're the hottest country anywhere in the world, with the strongest, most powerful military anywhere in the world, and there's nobody close.
Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said diplomacy and military preparedness remain aligned, adding Iran would negotiate when necessary, but would also be ready to defend its interests with strength.
Should it become necessary, should the interests of the state dictate that we prepare ourselves in the field of diplomacy, of discussion, of negotiation, then we will prepare ourselves, but with strength, the same strength with which the armed forces prepare themselves in defense of the country.
At the same time, an Israeli analyst warned Iran is tightening its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, saying tanker traffic through the key oil choke point is increasingly subject to Iranian oversight and could heighten the risk of wider escalation.
Pakistan is stepping up its mediation efforts between the United States and Iran as tensions continue in the Strait of Hormuz. With Washington, Tehran talks still ongoing. Pakistan's Interior Minister is in the region for a series of high-level meetings. Touraj Shiralilo reports from Minab.
I am reporting from the ruins of Minab Elementary School in Iran's Hormuzgan province, facing Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and the Strait of Hormuz. There is a program on Thursday to commemorate 168 schoolgirls killed on the first day of the Israel-US war with Iran on 28th of February. Meantime, in capital Tehran, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsen Reza Naqvi, whose country is mediating a peace agreement between Iran and the US. It is the second visit by the Pakistani official in less than a week, as Tehran was awaiting Washington's response to its proposal sent early this week. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai confirmed that the exchange of messages between Iran and the US is continuing, adding that the visit by Pakistan's Interior Minister serves as facilitating the exchange of messages. The visiting Pakistani official met his Iranian counterpart and President Masoud Pezeshkian upon his arrival in Tehran on Wednesday. He is also expected to meet with Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led the Iranian negotiators in the indirect talks with the US in Islamabad in April. Unconfirmed media reports suggested that Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir will also travel to Tehran in the near future to boost his country's mediation efforts. Touraj Shiralilo reporting from Minab for A News.
Well, joining me now is Lieutenant General Marco Saronia to discuss the latest developments in the Iran-US talks as mediation efforts gather pace through regional intermediaries, including Pakistan and Turkey, while indirect exchanges between Tehran and Washington continue. General, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you back on the show again. Pakistan acting as intermediary then, Iran saying messages with Washington are flowing, even Turkey suggesting there are issues that can be resolved. I mean, it looks like these talks are back in motion, doesn't it?
Good night, guys. Thank you very much for having me today. That's true. It's a kind of a soap that we have here from the last months with the exchange. But it's not bad, of course. Negotiations is important to trying to figure out any way out that could avoid the start of the military operation. So it's the way that it is. So, but we know from the very beginning that the red lines from both sides are not they strike one each other. So it's not easy to get an agreement. Nevertheless, the talks have been leading to somehow an accommodation in some objectives. From the U.S. side, now we have, it seems, only the freeway in the strait, in Hormuz Strait, and the issue of the nuclear program. Of course, that's it. It seems that the U.S. has let aside the missile issue. That is something that is a strong disagreement with Israel, as we know. And from the Iranian side, it's the issue of the sovereignty about the decisions about the nuclear program and the question of the issue of the strait that Iran want to control. They are building a capability to control that is already in place. So to control the ships and the traffic and the authorizations and the payoff tools, of course, it's something that is in the way. And it's something that the international community is not going to allow, I suppose. So let's see.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I suppose that we have some room if people think, and I suppose that Donald Trump is very much in a way to avoid the military, to restart the military operation. So and they keep the blockade and the strain of the Iranian economy in how long it could take to have some achievements in this, we don't know. But nevertheless, I suppose that let's see what's going to happen. With Pakistan trying to do their best to figure out a possible solution.
Yes.
But I suppose that will not be easy. But let's see what happens in the next couple of days, in the words of Donald Trump.
Yes, yeah, not easy indeed. But some glimmers of hope, though. I suppose. I mean, weeks of talks stalling and seemingly going nowhere. We're now seeing high-level visits to Tehran. US President Donald Trump, as you say, now saying that a decision on further action could come within the next few days. Does this basically all come together to kind of raise the stakes of these talks?
I suppose so, because we could understand that there are lots of pressure from Israel and some people in the U.S. administration also, that with the idea that U.S. has to do something more in the military point of view to somehow to put Iran more in a bad condition to negotiate, so to speak. We are not sure about that because we know that Iran has some capabilities to respond, missiles and drones against the Gulf countries again, and even with the attacks even to ships that are in the Persian Gulf, and so it's not quite clear that. A limited military operation, and that could be 2, 3, 4 days of bombing, and after stopping and restart the negotiation, it's enough to change the mindset of the Iranians. So let's see. That's the big question, because the pressure from Israel is very, very huge in Donald Trump. So we have seen from or we have read from some newspapers, New York Times, from today, that yesterday they had both Netanyahu and Donald Trump a very tense talk. So it's difficult to foresee what Donald Trump is going to decide, and so that's it. If I suppose that if Iran could take on board some of the requests of Donald Trump, maybe we can continue a process of negotiation without military operations. If Tehran comes with the same package, I suppose that it will be difficult to Donald Trump to keep the most peaceful way of action, so to speak, because the pressures are very high in Donald Trump to restart the military operation.
Do you think there's any possibility?
Now the ball is in the side of Tehran. So
it is indeed. But do you think there's any sense in which Tehran might deliberately do that? Might deliberately come back with an unsatisfying package in order to sort of almost provoke and tempt Mr. Trump into military action?
That could happen, because we have seen in the past months that even the high stakes of the Iranians in the negotiations have not led to Donald Trump to restart the war. So it's something that we are in a way that this diplomacy is also a pure strategy. So trying to figure out that the other side can, and this something works, other times does not work at all. So and the war will start. So let's see. But the pressure also from Pakistanis and from most probably the Chinese is concerning the Strait of Hormuz also could be I don't know if it will be enough to have this in the Iranians' positions. So, but for sure, if the Iranians come back with the same answers that they provided in the last round of negotiations, that will put Donald Trump in a very difficult situation, even internally, and even internally in the United States, because the Americans, I suppose, and Donald Trump has already realized that is worse for the Americans. The American opinion. To Donald Trump to come back home with a fail, or to keep the blockade more 1, 2, 3 months. That will be a disaster for the international trade, as we know. But it could be better understood by the voters in the United States in the intermediate elections than to bring home a defeat. And Donald Trump this is a dilemma. We know from his mindset he don't want to restart the military operation. It's almost for sure. But they have, as I said, they have a lot of pressure from others, especially the Israelis and some people in the administration that are pushing him to restart the operations, trying to figure out if that could work to ease the position of the Iranians, at least in the nuclear side, and the Strait, of course. It's the minimum. The minimum line that the U.S. could accept is open of the Strait, and at least start of negotiations about a peace program, a nuclear peace program, and to take out the enriched uranium that is there. So it's the minimum line, I suppose, that the U.S. could accept. Let's see if the Iranians are going to do that or not, but we'll see.
Let's see, indeed. General, always great to get your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us again on Primetime. Thank you.
Okay, it is a pleasure. Thank you very much, Guy.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us.
Moi, Luis Moreno Campo, déclare solennellement.
We've seen remarkable developments between Baku and Yerevan.
We are against all of this kind of peace.
Russia does not want Pashinyan to win. Russia wants perpetual conflict.
Region that's in conflict or in tension is better for their ability to play a role.
Russian oligarchs are less about money and more about political influence.
Russia can make its own interventions through online postings.
Que j'ai rempli mes devoirs et exercerai mes attributions de procureur de la Cour pénale internationale.
Money in politics everywhere is corrupting influence, but when it becomes weaponized by a foreign power.
The main thing we have money. Too much resources, too much money.
The main topic is to change Pashinyan.
They have boss and big boss. Big boss which is in Russia.
L'impartialité et en toute conscience.
We are for pressuring Pashinyan. We are organizing rallies on the streets.
Et que je répéterai le caractère confidentiel de ces enquêtes.
They are election time. And election time is everything binary.
Maksud aku que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. The European Union is moving closer to securing a trade agreement with the United States aimed at easing tariff tensions. The deal is seen as an effort to prevent a renewed transatlantic trade dispute ahead of a key deadline set by Washington. Anita Sharma reports from Europe.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the European Union has moved a step closer to finalizing a trade deal with Washington, hoping to avoid a fresh tariff escalation from U.S. President Donald Trump. EU member states backed the legal framework needed to implement the agreement, which would lower tariffs on a range of American goods in exchange for avoiding a threatened hike in U.S. duties on European exports, including cars. European Trade Commissioner Mato Sefcovic welcomed the move, writing on X, "The EU walks the talk while defending our interests. Once approved, it'll boost transatlantic stability and cooperation." But the clock is ticking. Trump has warned that if the deal is not fully finalized by July 4th, the U.S. could impose higher tariffs, raising the risk of a damaging transatlantic trade fight. Critics argue Brussels is conceding too much, opening its market wider to U.S. industrial, agricultural, and seafood products, while Washington keeps a 15% baseline tariff on most EU exports. Notably, a tougher safeguard was dropped, one that would have forced Washington to act first, highlighting unease in Brussels about tying trade too tightly to broader geopolitical disputes. Supporters counter that the alternative would be far worse, a trade war with Europe's largest export market at a time when the bloc's economy remains under pressure. The agreement does include safeguards, though. Brussels can suspend the deal if Washington fails to uphold its commitments, and unless renewed, the arrangement expires in 2029. For Europe's exporters, automakers, and investors, avoiding another trade shock matters. But politically, the real test is whether this stabilizes transatlantic ties or simply delays the next confrontation. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Turkey has proposed a fuel pipeline project aimed at strengthening energy supply security along NATO's eastern flank. Well, the announcement came during the FS 2026 military exercise as tensions around the Hormuz Strait continue to raise concern over fuel, transport and energy security. Adam Morrow brings us more from Istanbul.
Turkey is putting forward a new energy security proposal for NATO. At a Wednesday press briefing, the Turkish Defense Ministry unveiled its proposal for what it calls a NATO fuel pipeline project, designed to enhance energy security for alliance members on NATO's eastern flank. According to the ministry, the proposed pipeline is aimed at reducing dependence on traditional maritime fuel transport routes. This is especially important now, given ongoing tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, a critical energy choke point linking producers in the Persian Gulf with international markets. Recent hostilities between Iran, Israel, and the United States have increased concerns over the security of energy shipping routes. According to officials, Turkey's pipeline proposal could be carried out faster than alternative options and would be around 5 times more cost-effective. For Ankara, the initiative is part of a broader argument, namely that Turkey's strategic geography allows it to play a key role in NATO's energy, logistics, and security planning. The timing of the announcement is also significant. The proposal was unveiled on the penultimate day of the FS 2026 joint exercises, one of Turkey's largest combined live-fire military drills, in which NATO allies and partner countries are taking part. The pipeline proposal, therefore, is about more than just energy security. It's also another signal that Turkey hopes to position itself as a key logistics and security hub for NATO at a time of steadily mounting regional volatility. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Georgian Parliament Speaker Shelva Papuashvili has criticised the British government after the UK eased sanctions on Russia. He said Britain had previously pressured Georgia to stop importing Russian oil products. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports from Tbilisi.
Britain has eased sanctions on Russian oil products this week, citing energy security concerns. But the timing has sparked a sharp political reaction in Georgia. Parliament Speaker Shelva Papuashvili says that the British ambassador to Georgia personally lobbied Georgian officials, including members of parliament, to stop importing Russian oil products and to pressure private businesses to follow suit. When Georgian officials raised concerns about rising fuel costs for ordinary citizens, Papuashvili claims that the ambassador responded that British citizens were facing the same burden and that Georgia should accept it too. The British side has not publicly responded to those claims. What brought the issue to a head was the UK's announcement on May 20th that it would allow diesel and jet fuel refined from Russian crude in third countries, as well as Russian seaborne liquefied natural gas to enter the country. Prime Minister Keir Starmer defended the move, saying that it was intended to protect British consumers from soaring energy prices driven by the conflict in the Middle East. Britain is not alone. The United States has extended a similar sanctions waiver on Russian seaborne oil, also citing supply disruptions linked to tensions with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Still, critics in both Britain and Ukraine have accused London of backtracking on commitments to cut off Russian oil revenues that help fund the war. Georgia has maintained economic ties with Russia throughout the conflict, a position long criticized by its Western partners. Papuashvili's remarks will be seen by some as a legitimate challenge to Western double standards and by others as an attempt to deflect attention from Georgia's own trade relationship with Moscow. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Kazakhstan and Kenya are looking to deepen economic ties, with Astana proposing a new trade route linking the Middle Corridor to East Africa. During a state visit to Kazakhstan, Kenyan President William Ruto and President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev discussed transport, trade and investment, signing 10 cooperation agreements. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamazina reports.
Kazakhstan is seeking closer economic links with Africa. During the state visit of Kenyan President William Ruto to Astana, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev proposed connecting the Middle Corridor with East Africa through Kenya's major ports. The plan would link the Trans-Caspian International Transport route with the ports of Mombasa Port and Port of Lamu, two of East Africa's main logistics hubs. Mombasa alone serves as a key regional gateway connecting trade routes across much of East and Central Africa, including several landlocked countries. For Kazakhstan, this could open new export routes and wider access to African markets. For Kenya, it strengthens its role as a gateway to the East African community, a regional market of around 300 million people. Kazakhstan already handles about 85% of overland cargo moving between China and Europe. Now Astana wants to connect that transit network with Africa's maritime routes while also relying on the broader infrastructure potential of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Trade was high on the agenda. Bilateral trade turnover exceeded $52 million last year and continues to grow steadily. Kazakhstan is seeking to increase grain exports, while Kenya wants to expand the shipments of tea, coffee and flowers. Officials also discussed the idea of a trade hub in Astana for Kenyan goods. cargo air routes and the long-term possibility of direct flights between Astana and Nairobi were also discussed as a way to support the business and trade. The visit ended with the signing of 10 cooperation agreements as both sides seek to deepen economic ties between Central Asia and Africa. Farisa Kalimursina, Almaty, A News.
Serbian President Alexander Vučić is due to be in Beijing this Saturday for a 5-day state visit, becoming the latest world leader to arrive in the Chinese capital, which has hosted both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin within the space of a week. Manor Makdoum has more from Beijing.
Beijing is preparing for another high-profile visit, this time from Serbian President Alexander Vučić, who is set to arrive here on Saturday for a 5-day state visit at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. This will be his first formal state visit to China, and Beijing has been keen to underline just how significant it considers the relationship. Chinese officials describe Serbia as the first European country to build what they call a community with a shared future with China and an important partner in Central and Eastern Europe. Serbia was the first European country to join China's Belt and Road Initiative back in 2015, even while it was actively pursuing EU membership. It's a little-known fact that helps explain why China treats Serbia as such a prized partner on the continent. The visit comes at a notable moment. Just this week, Beijing hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin, and days before that, US President Donald Trump. The fact that Serbian leader is next in line speaks to China's efforts to engage actively across the geopolitical spectrum. On the agenda here are expected to be trade, infrastructure and investment, including the ongoing Belgrade-Subotica high-speed railway project, as well as overall economic cooperation under the Serbia-China Free Trade Agreement. Morning A News, Beijing.
After the break, we'll take a look at the top stories of the day. Do not go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Tensions are rising between Israel and several European countries following the detention of activists aboard a Gaza-bound aid flotilla. Images released by Israel's security minister have sparked diplomatic criticism internationally as well as concern within Israel itself.
Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has sparked an international diplomatic crisis after publishing footage showing detained international activists being abused by Israeli security forces. The activists were part of the global Sumud flotilla, which departed from Turkey last week carrying humanitarian aid bound for Gaza. In the footage, Ben-Gvir is seen waving an Israeli flag and mocking the activists after their detention.
They came here full of pride, acting like heroes. Look at them now. They are not heroes. They are supporters of terror. I say to Prime Minister Netanyahu, keep them here longer. Put them in the terrorists' prisons. This is how they should be treated.
Israeli authorities said around 430 activists from 40 countries were detained and taken to Ashdod port after the interception. Lawyers for the group say several activists were injured during the operation, with 3 briefly hospitalized and others suffering suspected broken ribs and breathing problems. Some detainees are expected to be transferred to Ketziot prison in southern Israel, according to rights group Adalah and flotilla organizers. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the conduct was not in line with Israel's values and ordered the activists deported. Foreign Minister Gideon Sayar accused Ben-Gvir of damaging Israel's international standing. The footage also triggered widespread condemnation around the world. Belgium, France, Spain and the Netherlands summoned Israeli diplomats for explanations, while Greece, Ireland and Italy demanded the immediate release of their citizens. Leaders from the UK, Canada, Germany, Australia and New Zealand also condemned the treatment of activists on board the flotilla. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung described Israel's actions as way out of line and questioned the legality of arrests carried out in international waters. Even US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, a longtime ally of Israel, called Ben-Gvir's behaviour despicable and said the minister had betrayed the dignity of his nation. The flotilla was the latest attempt by international activists to break Israel's blockade on Gaza, where aid agencies continue to warn of severe shortages of food, medicine and other essential supplies, despite the ongoing Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
Turning now to the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa. The World Health Organization says it could take up to 9 months before a vaccine targeting this particular strain is ready. Well, more than 600 suspected cases and 139 suspected deaths have been reported so far, though officials warn the numbers are expected to rise.
Health authorities in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are stepping up Ebola preparedness measures amid fears the latest outbreak could spread into the densely populated city of Bukavu. Hospitals have reinforced surveillance systems, while local authorities introduced epidemiological screening and population tracing at key entry points into the city.
At all entry points to the city of Bukavu, epidemiological control and surveillance measures have been put in place. Monitoring of movements as well as tracing of population have also been established and will continue for as long as necessary.
Medical experts warn that major logistical challenges are slowing the response, with samples from Bukavu forced to travel long distances by boat and road before reaching laboratories in Kinshasa.
You know, a sample from Bukavu has to cross Lake Kivu by boat to Goma. From Goma, it takes a taxi or a bus to Beni Butembo, and from there, we look for a flight to Kinshasa. So, you understand that from Bukavu to Goma, then from Goma to Beni Butembo, it takes a lot of time. And this delay is not good for managing an epidemic like the Ebola virus disease. It is a major logistical constraint. It takes a lot of time, and the authorities must think about this situation.
The World Health Organization says there are now around 600 suspected Ebola cases and more than 130 suspected deaths across Congo and neighboring Uganda. The outbreak is linked to the rare Bundibugyo strain of the virus, for which there is currently no approved vaccine. Residents in Bukavu say worsening economic conditions and overcrowding are increasing fears about the city's ability to cope if the outbreak spreads further.
We are in a situation of economic and financial crisis. Even getting soap has become a problem. We think that if the disease arrives in the city, there will be deaths. As you know, the city of Bukavu is very densely populated.
Authorities say monitoring measures will remain in place for as long as necessary.
Bolivia's deepening political and economic crisis spilled onto the streets of the capital La Paz on Wednesday as hundreds rallied against protest blockades. Demonstrators say worsening food and fuel shortages are leaving families struggling to cope.
Hundreds of Bolivians marched through La Paz on Wednesday, demanding an end to protest blockades they say have caused severe shortages of food and fuel and pushed families deeper into hardship. Protesters said the blockades in parts of the country have worsened daily living conditions as supplies run low.
We are calling for the lifting of the blockades at once, please. We don't know what food to give our children. The pot is empty. We have nothing. We are dying of hunger here in La Paz.
Anti-government demonstrations have escalated across Bolivia, with thousands demanding the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz as road blockades leave La Paz short of food, fuel and medicine. Protesters are opposing austerity measures and rising living costs, while some are calling for his resignation. In response to the protests over austerity measures, President Rodrigo Paz said that he would reshuffle his cabinet.
La conducta del presidente Petro es irreprochable.
And from the government, I want to announce that we are not only going to carry out a reshuffle of the cabinet, because we have to reshuffle a cabinet that has to have a capacity to listen. The president cannot be everywhere.
Paz also announced the creation of an Economic and Social Council, which he said would meet monthly and allow all sectors to participate in building a joint government with full transparency. Tensions have been mounting for weeks as protests that began with strikes in early May expanded into a nationwide movement involving labour unions, miners, transport workers and rural groups. The unrest comes as Bolivia faces its worst economic crisis in 40 years, with annual inflation hitting 14% in April, eroding purchasing power and fueling anger over rising living costs.
And finally, Indonesia is preparing for Eid al-Adha, a major religious holiday that brings a seasonal rush to livestock markets. But this year, cattle and goat sellers are facing a more uncertain market as price rises and buyers become more cautious.
In Depok, West Java, cows fill the pens of a busy livestock market ahead of Eid al-Adha, one of the most important periods of the year for Indonesia's cattle and goat sellers. This year, the market is being shaped by higher operating costs, a weaker rupiah, and global uncertainty linked to the Middle East conflict.
The fuel prices weren't that high in January, so we've had these cows on display since 5 months ago, so that their prices even out the current prices. If I'd only bought my cattle in April or May, I would have had to increase prices. We can see, compared to our capital purchases in January, May purchases are higher due to the dollar and oil prices.
The rupiah dropped as much as 1.2% on Monday to a record low of 17,670 against the dollar, despite intervention by Indonesia's central bank. Stocks also fell, while global oil prices rose to 2-week highs, adding pressure before the holiday season.
Yes, our purchasing power is going down compared to previous years, especially with the war between Iran, US, and Israel.
Even with higher prices, buyers are still moving through the cattle pens, checking animals and comparing options before Eid. For some, the Kurban tradition remains a priority, despite the weaker economic mood.
We had thought that people would be discouraged from buying cattle, but it turns out the Kurban spirit is still there. There's still people with high desires to buy livestock, even with the current economic conditions.
In Jakarta, goats are also being kept in pens ahead of the holiday, but sellers say the market is quieter than it was a year ago. Early bookings, which usually begin before the peak Eid period, have been slower this season.
If I compare last year with this year, last year we had more buyers. Last year, way before Eid, we had people booking goats, even before peak Eid season. Now we have 1 or 2, but compared to last year, it was more crowded.
Each year, around 50 million animals are sacrificed for Eid al-Adha, with the meat traditionally shared among families, friends, and people in poverty.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime for tonight. Andy Mioch will be with you tomorrow, bringing you the very latest news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.